let's look at our text briefly. So Paul, the writer of Romans, and he says, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God to salvation for everyone who believes, for the Jew first and also for the Greek. For in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, the just shall live by faith." Now look at this statement, family. Look at with me this first statement in verse 16. Paul says, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God to salvation for everyone who believes." Now, when I look at this writing here, and I even speak it out myself, I say, what confidence Paul has in order to make such a statement. He says, "I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God to save everyone." So when I look at this, commentators would say that this statement here is Paul's theology in summary. And I ask the question, as I read this text, what would make Paul make such a declaration, such an emphatic declaration about the gospel of Christ? Now, this book here was written later on in his life, much later, like towards the end of his life and his missionary journey. So history would tell me that he has experienced a lot of things and seen a lot of things through the workings of the gospel of Christ, which caused him to say that I am not ashamed of the gospel. You see, many of us are closet Christians. Amen. See, we're not like Paul. We are ashamed of the gospel of Christ. Amen. To some extent, we don't want to be labeled Christian. Fear of being rejected, being reviled, fear of not being accepted by others. Oh, there those Christians go. But Paul says, Paul has this conviction, family, and once we experience some things in our life and we see God move in our life through the gospel of Christ, we be able to say like Paul, I am not ashamed to be a Christian. Amen. I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God that saved me, that saved you. Thank you. So as we look at this sermon or this series on effective evangelism, in order for us to be effective, as I closed out last Sunday, we must not leave the gospel of Christ, the message, out of our proclamation, out of our preaching.